It's time for In Bed with Jed.
Welcome back to In Bed with Jed. I'm Jed Ryan, and welcome to my bed. And today we have a very, very special guest who's going to be joining me from his bed. And happy Father's Day, everybody. In honor of my late father, I have some Bailey's Irish Cream in my morning coffee, which would be the greatest homage to him whatsoever. My dad never met a drink he didn't like. So cheers and happy Father's Day to all you daddies out there. Now, people ask me all the time, on a day-to-day basis, how can I become more politically aware, more politically conscious? How can I learn more about Black Lives Matter? And how can I do my part, whether I'm going out and actually marching and joining in the protests, or if I'm not able to and I want to do my part, but I'm just staying at home? And in cases like that, I always give my opinion, but I like to defer to the experts on the matter. And we have someone today who is very politically aware. He's right. He just has the pulse of what's going on in our community and beyond. And he is Nathan James. Everybody welcome him. And he is a author and an activist. His articles have appeared in, he's a freelance writer for the LGBTQ community, with a special focus on the LGBTQ community of color. And his articles have appeared in two of my favorite news sites, BuzzFeed.com and Medium.com, also NBC Out and DBQ, which is David Brideford Quarterly, and also the HollywoodDigest.com. And Nathan, also GBM News. Do you want to tell us what that stands for and a little bit about that?
Well, GBM News, I was with GBM News for 12 years. And by the way, it's such a privilege to be here in bed with you. Thank you for having me this morning.
Yes.
But
a little early.
I was the executive editor of GBM News for 12 years, and it was one of my labors of love. It was a comprehensive platform for and about the LGBTQ community of color. It will be back. It will be back. We haven't determined a date yet, but it is coming back. And in the meantime, as you mentioned, all the other platforms that I contribute to keep me very, very busy.
Wow. Well, how are you doing today? And you said you have a busy schedule today, right?
Yes, today there is going to be a LGBTQ queer march here in Philadelphia in Love Park. And it is to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter and to acknowledge the support of the BLM community for the LGBTQ community. In fact, did you know that one of the founders of Black Lives Matter is a member of our community too?
No, I did not know that. What's his name?
DeRay McKeeson, and he was a mayoral candidate in the city of Baltimore. And he's family. He's an activist, very much involved in the issues in his city and all around the country. And he was instrumental in raising awareness of BLM and what it stands for and what Black Lives Matter hopes to accomplish.
Oh, wow. So how have you been, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But how have you been holding up during the lockdown? Because I know it's been rough for all of us. and how have you been managing to channel your creative energies during this time period?
Well, I'll tell you, it hasn't always been easy. I've had, like everybody else, my highs and lows. There were days when I was just an emotional mess, so I had to find coping mechanisms. And one of them, as you just mentioned, was my writing. I've done quite a bit since the lockdown started here in Philadelphia, and I think I've gotten quite a few things accomplished. I was privileged to take part in helping my friend Dwight Allen O'Neill create his first book, which is called Shoulda, Coulda, Woulda. it's available now on Amazon, and it's definitely a book aimed squarely at the LGBTQ community. It has a lot of little vignettes, life lessons that he talks about that I think make a lot of sense for today's, especially for the younglings coming up today. I've also had the privilege to interview our friend Eileen Shapiro for Get
Yes.
Out
Hello,
magazine,
Eileen.
and her book Waiting for Adam, which is on its way later this summer. I've written for all the platforms that you mentioned, all the wonderful LGBTQ aware platforms that I can share my views and keep people up to date on what's going on, because the pandemic, in my opinion at least, has hit the LGBTQ community especially hard. And I wanted to be able to give people a resource to not just to find out what's going on, but also to show that we're all in this together. I know that's a well-worn phrase, but I think it's very apropos.
It's a well-worn phrase, but it's definitely one worth repeating. And I remember back at the beginning when the virus was just a little blurb here and there on the news, you were one of the first people in our circle, shall we say, to really take it seriously and to remind people, oh, this is not a joke. This is something that needs to be taken seriously, because a lot of people just didn't know what to make of it. Where do we stand on that now in terms of the pandemic?
Well, you're right. Back in the beginning, when people were not certain what to make of the virus, I said that COVID is today. I think we're beginning to see, we had a lot of states in the deep south and in other parts of the country away from the Northeast corridor that hadn't seen the kind of impact that you and I have experienced in New York and Philadelphia, and they didn't feel that the virus was any real threat. They're starting to see an uptick in the number of cases being reported, the number of people going to the hospital, and the people are beginning to realize that, well, it's not over yet. And I don't think it's going to be over until we have a working vaccine that is in widespread use.
Right, right. Yes, thankfully in New York City, which is where I am, we were at the epicenter, and thankfully, as an insider, kind of seeing what's going on, at least in the healthcare setting, we have seen fewer ER admissions. We have reduced the number of beds and number of floors that we had just for the COVID patients. And we're starting to see some encouraging signs. Of course, unfortunately, there's other parts of the country where it is becoming a problem. And I always say, I just don't want people to learn the hard way. I hope that we all take that ounce of prevention and really just try and take simple steps to, simple steps to help do our part. I mean, listen, nobody likes being cooped up, especially people like you and me who would much rather be out and doing something else. It's rough, it's rough when you have to stay in and make the most of it, or reduce the amount of time you spend socializing with people. But what have you seen now in Philadelphia where you live? Is it a similar situation, or is it, what's going on there?
Well, what's going on now is a couple of weeks ago, the governor moved our area from red to yellow, which means that instead of it being a stay-at-home order, they've relaxed that a little bit, and people are starting to be able to get out a little more, although a lot of businesses are still closed under this order. Now, next Friday, this coming Friday actually, they're going to move the Philadelphia area, that's the city of Philadelphia and all 4 of the surrounding counties, from yellow to green. And that means you'll be able to see things like barbershops opening, more in-person retail. There will be gatherings permitted up to 250 people, things like that. And I really have to say that on the one hand, I'm happy to get out of house arrest because it was a long, tough struggle. But I also want to see people use a little common sense, because if people rush to go out without taking precautions, or they rush to do things in large groups without really thinking it through, we might find ourselves back in lockdown again once the fall and the winter roll around. So I'm concerned about that. So I guess the proper phrase from the way I feel about it now would be cautiously optimistic.
Right, right. Cautiously optimistic. You gotta love when people will rant on social media or in the news about how they shouldn't have to wear a mask or shouldn't have to take precautions. And all I could think of is in the amount of time that they're analyzing and thinking this over, it takes 3 seconds or less to put on a mask. And if you want to add another 20 seconds to wash your hands, that's less than 1 minute of time that you spend in your life. And if a little bit of prevention can help your health or the health of others, or possibly your life or the life of others, is that really so much of a sacrifice that we have to make? But it comes a point where you just have to hope that people make the right decisions, and everybody, if you're over the age of 18, you're legally an adult, so you have the right to make that decision. We can only hope they make the right one, right?
I honestly don't understand. For example, I saw a little bit of the Trump rally in Tulsa last night, and there was almost no one there wearing a mask, and they're in this enclosed space, and they're in close proximity to one another, and they're yelling at the top of their lungs. And I don't understand why they refuse to believe that there is a significant risk factor here. You're right, masks don't take that long to put on, and washing your hands is not a big complicated affair, but there are still people out there that don't feel that this is important. And they are also discounting the risk they pose to everyone else. And again, the leadership, AKA President Trump, isn't making things any better because he is repeatedly appearing in public without a mask himself. So it's kind of counterintuitive, and even our own health commissioner here in Pennsylvania, Dr. Rachel Levine, are telling us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's again, Tulsa. I know a couple of people there. Hey, Candy, how you doing? And it's a beautiful city. And I don't want people to have to learn the hard way. And I do watch the news. And again, it's a funny thing. You want everybody to be safe, but all we can do as a healthcare provider and as just a person who, someone who is for humanity, all you can do is just kind of give people the facts, hope they take them. But you're right. This has become politicized. Depending on what side of the political spectrum you are, will often play a large part in whether you take precautions. And healthcare should never be politicized. And especially because viruses don't discriminate, as we all know. So. Yeah. Now, you've been an active presence. You've been covering the protests for justice and against police brutality, and you've been really on the front lines of what's going on. And what have you learned from being there, from being right up where the action is, from what you've seen from other people? What have you learned from this that you didn't know before this movement?
Well, my number one takeaway from the protests, both what I've seen in person in Philadelphia and what I've watched on television around the country, is that this is something that has clearly galvanized both the younger generation and our own generation. They have become actively interested in what agents of the state are doing as they enforce the law. And the devastating videos that we've seen, the footage that we've seen of George Floyd, the footage that we've seen of Rayshard Brooks, the footage that we've seen of Ahmaud Arbery, and the horrifying incident that we heard about in Louisville involving Breonna Taylor, these are all things that I think are waking America up collectively and saying that, this is something that needs to be fundamentally changed. This is not working. This cannot be allowed to continue because it's putting the people of color community at risk, at great risk. It should not be that you're engaged in an ordinary activity like Ahmaud Arbery was, and then the next thing you know, there's a lynch mob chasing you down and killing you. There should not be, when the police need to arrest you for a minor violation, it shouldn't escalate to the point where deadly force is being used. What happened to George Floyd is completely unacceptable. What happened to Rayshard Brooks is unacceptable. And I think that people are finally starting to be aware. I don't know if that's because of the increased prevalence of video in today's day and age versus what might have happened in the past, or because it's a newer generation. But I noticed just from the number and passion of the people that I saw in Philadelphia that this is something that has captured the public imagination, and in the public mind, this calls for a radical, comprehensive, and transformative change. So in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago, I was at the protest march that went from the Philadelphia Museum of Art to City Hall. And as protests that I've seen, and everybody was wearing a mask, they were doing appropriate social distancing, and even the police were on their best behavior, for lack of a better phrase. So I definitely think that this is the catalyst, like the riots at Stonewall were 50 years ago, for meaningful, lasting, positive change. And I hope that we carry forward with that.
Yes, yes. Now, you and I are probably around the same generation, though. And I remember, I mean, I'm very happy about the Supreme Court decision recently. That is definitely a reason to be glad. It's a reason to celebrate. But part of me was also like, wait a minute, this decision probably came, in my opinion, about 60 years too late. Because, you know, equality for all and equal treatment and, you know, equal treatment, in other words, not discriminating against people for their private lives and everything, and have that spill into the larger work issues of workplace and employment and things like that. That should have never been an issue in the first place, but yet still we're celebrating something in 2020, which, in my opinion, probably should have never have been, or should have been settled a long time ago. Very similar to now that we're talking about racial equality and speaking out against injustices.
Moment for the LGBT community.
What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Your image froze for a second. I was saying that the Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ discrimination in Title VII was a watershed moment for the LGBT community. And I was very, very surprised that Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion for that decision. There's two reasons I think this is important. Number one, if even one of Trump's conservative judges understands that this particular section of the Civil Rights Act is clearly plain and obvious on its face, that should tell the country something. When he wrote his decision, he said that one of the things that is concerned in this case is that an employer has two employees that are both attracted to men. One is a man and one is a woman. And if the employer treats the woman differently than the man, then by definition, sex discrimination has in fact occurred. So it's not a question of what did the legislators who wrote the 64 Civil Rights Act have in mind when they drafted the language. It's a question of it's abundantly including sexual orientation or gender identity. So this is a big step forward. We can no longer be fired for who we are. And as you yourself said, this is about 50 years too late. And I think
60.
That's absolutely, at least, yes, 60. It should have been, you know, this really goes to the 14th Amendment, the equal protection under the laws. If you're a citizen of the United States and a citizen of the state where you live, you are entitled to be protected equally, regardless of who you are. And it took 100 years for Congress to decide that that included people beyond what the traditional definition was. And then it took, like you said, another 50 plus years to include us. But we're here now. I do expect to see some blowback from that, because keep in mind that if Trump wins the election, and God forbid he not only wins the election, but keeps control of Congress in both houses, they could just draft legislation to push us out of the way again. It's not like Trump hasn't already tried or done this before.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, but also, don't you feel that, like, now when we were kids, obviously the subject of racism would come up. Don't you feel that, like, wait a minute, why is this still an issue in 2020? Isn't this, do you think that, like, are we making, like, is making progress, but it's too slow, or are there just a lot of things holding us back, or why does it seem to take so long for our country to get its act together, and for humanity in general to look beyond just skin color? Why do you think that is?
Well, social change, by definition, moves slowly. Think about this. The 13th Amendment was ratified before the end of the Civil War, January of 1865, ending slavery. The 14th Amendment was ratified not too long after, and again, that gives all the citizens of the United States, including former slaves, equal justice under the law. But then we went through 100 years of Jim Crow after that. So even though the letter of the law was one thing, people in the Deep South who did not want to accept that change found a way to do an end run around that. And we had 100 years of segregation enforced by terrorism. And people are slow to give up their beliefs, especially when these are beliefs that run in families that get handed down from generation to generation. And this is what people grow up with. I mean, in 2020, we're still living in a society that has issues with its LGBTQ citizens who are their neighbors, who work with them every day. We still see transgender women being killed in horrific numbers. We just had an absolutely blood-curdling case here in Philadelphia where a young trans woman named Dominique Fell was found in the Schuylkill River. Her body was cut up into pieces and she was stuffed in a suitcase. The police are chasing a suspect, but here's the thing. That's still going on in spite of all the public awareness that has been made available to people online, in popular culture, and so forth. So people are very, very loath to give up their long-held beliefs. This is why people are still clinging to Trump, even though every day we see more and more evidence of the kind of person he is and why his presidency has shown him to be a very low individual. So why are we dealing with these kinds of things in 2020? We shouldn't be, you're right. But I don't see us getting a full, true, equal seat at the table as LGBT individuals or as people of color or as women. I don't see that coming for quite a few years yet because it's going to take time. Change like this is generational in nature. That's why I said before that I thought the younger generation, Generation Y, Generation Z, and the younger millennials are the ones who are going to be the driving factor in this because they are not necessarily carrying forward the beliefs or the prejudices of their parents.
Right, right. Well, we can only hope. We get inspired. I mean, I get inspired, and I'm sure you do, with all the young people that are finally, for the first time, registering to vote, that are finally going out there and putting themselves in positions. Hopefully, they're there for the right reasons, as all of us, and are really, like, taking initiative in making change. So, like you said, we can only hope, right? And all of us work day to day, to try and make those changes, however we may choose to do them. Use your individual skills, whatever you feel is your own gift, and do that. Now, we mentioned Gay Pride, rather, June, and so we all think about Marsha Johnson during this time, Marsha P. Johnson. We all think about Sylvia Rivera. And who are some of the more unsung heroes in the LGBT community of color that people should really know about, that people should discover, who's really ripe for rediscovery and their achievements kind of like get pushed aside? Who are some of your favorites in that regard?
Well, any recitation of the unsung LGBTQ heroes of color, in my opinion, has to begin with people like Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a civil rights advocate. He was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s tutor. He was the man who organized and put together the March on Washington in 1963. Without him, the civil rights movement would have been very, very different, and it would not have moved forward with the rapidity that it did. And the reason that he is an unsung hero, of course, is because he was an openly gay black man in an era when being gay itself was illegal, and he did this in the Deep South while Jim Crow was still in effect. So he is somebody that I would begin with as an unsung hero that people really ought to get to know. In addition to him, the Stonewall Rebellion was set off in effect by two what we would call trans women of color today, and they are Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia Rivera and Stormy DeLavery. Stormy is actually credited with throwing the first punch when the cops burst into the Stonewall Inn. Marsha P. Johnson was an organizer even then, and she continued to work with groups like Rainbow United Front, and she was there physically present at Stonewall on that particular historic evening. Sylvia Rivera, a drag queen, another woman of color. These are people that should be included in any retelling of the Stonewall story, and they're often left out and lost to history. And these are people that everyone should get acquainted with. I would also add to this someone who is the architect of modern American dance, and his name was Alvin Ailey. The school in Midtown Manhattan, where students come from all over the world to study contemporary dance, is named after him. He passed away in 1981 of AIDS, and he has changed the fabric of the art and the culture of dance in the United States. So I would definitely add him. Someone else people should know, and I think this is very relevant because he has a new reunion special coming out, is Patrick Ian Polk. He is the creator of the groundbreaking television series Noah's Ark, first major television series to feature a Black gay cast and talk about our lives and our issues in a way that had such an impact on the community when it first came out 15 years ago. His reunion special will be on his Facebook page on July 5th with all of the cast and all of the familiar faces we know and we've come to love. And I would add, as a final name on the list, I would definitely add my friend Wilfredo Florentino. He's significant because he is running for city council in New York in 2021. And his campaign is in District 42, East New York, Brownsville. Now, honestly, who would have thought that at some point in time, a gay man of color would be running for city council from East New York? I remember East New York as a very, very different place when I was in the emergency medical service, and now look at the change. And he has a whole host of very, very fortuitous ideas, and he, along with the other gay and lesbian candidates and trans candidates that are running for city council now, I think are going to change the face of our city in New York. So these are people that I think that our community and the public at large should get to know better in this Pride Month and in every month of the year.
Yes, yes, I agree. And it's about time that the political landscape actually reflects the people that live there. And New York is obviously one of the most diverse cities in America. So the people that are running it should be a reflection of the population. They should look like who they're representing. So yes, it is about time. But also we want to say, well, it's about, what took so long too, so wow. Now you mentioned Philly. I know that you used to live in New York. We used to be neighbors. So you moved from New York to Philly. Did you have any culture shock, as they call it? Like when you first moved, like what was the changes that you noticed between the two places?
To tell you, yeah, I was a bit surprised by the changes that I noticed when I came to Philadelphia. You're right, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, grew up in and around the city. I lived in Queens, and I moved from Queens to Philly. And one of the biggest changes, I guess, for me was that even though New York and Philadelphia are not that far away, they're only separated by about 80 miles of railroad track. There is a difference even in the way that people refer to things or the names that things have. For example, in New York, footlong sandwich is a hero. In Philadelphia, it's a hoagie. You go from heroes to hoagies in about an hour and a half
Even
on
I
the
knew
train,
that,
and
yes.
it's just, and it's astonishing to me. Another thing that I noticed right away was that, even like the different boroughs in New York City all have their own culture. Well, Philadelphia has its own culture too. You definitely know that you are not where you were, and it has a very vibrant and very active LGBTQ community. And I came to the neighborhood, and the neighborhood immediately reminded me of what the village was like about 10 or 15 years ago, because it still has a lot of vibrant clubs, and there's a very, very active clientele. At least it was in BC before coronavirus. We'll see what happens to the neighborhood after things get back to some semblance of normality. Another thing I noticed that is different about Philadelphia is it's a little bit more relaxed than Manhattan. I like to call it Manhattan without the drama. When you go to Center City, it's not wall-to-wall people crushing the sidewalks like you see in Midtown Manhattan. And there is obviously very much a sense of history here, because so much of our early American history took place here in Philadelphia. Cheesesteaks are a thing, okay? And, this is something that's very much a Philadelphia thing. It's a point of local pride. You have the sports teams here, and the rivalry between the Eagles and the Giants is just as fierce as it is between the Yankees and the Red Sox. So I noticed that. Much more of an easygoing culture. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that it's not as hectic here, or that it's not as fast and furious as Manhattan, which I like, by the way. I'm in a point in my life now where I don't mind slowing down just a little bit. And I have met so many people here, just a little, not a great deal. I can still come back to Manhattan and walk at 90 miles an hour just like everybody else, and get annoyed when somebody's walking too slow in front of me. I still have that in me, but I've noticed that. And there are different traditions. For example, they have a mummers parade on New Year's Day. That's not done in any other city. It has its issues, but it's still very entertaining. And I think that anyone looking to come out to Philadelphia for a day or a couple of days to see a change of pace will be very, very pleasantly surprised by what our city has to offer. And I've really come to fall in love with it. I call it home now. I really, really do.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, it is one of my favorite places too. And I agree with you. There are aspects that are similar to New York, but it is distinct in its own way. And again, there's a lot, I'm sure, like any other city, there's areas that even the people that live there still have yet to discover. It's kind of like if you just take the time to maybe walk through a different neighborhood or take the road less traveled, you'll discover some new things that you had not known about before. So that's what I like about Philadelphia. And I can't wait to go back there again. So, wow.
Oh, it definitely has its own culture. And
yes.
And one of the other things I really like about Philadelphia is it's centrally located. If I need to come up to New York or go down to DC, that's very easy to do. That's very, very easy to do, whether you're driving or taking the train, as I do.
Right, right. Oh, well, we won't talk about driving because I think you did mention it's, I think, 2 hours away, but that depends sometimes. Going through New Jersey, it could be a lot more than 2 hours sometimes. I speak from experience and all that, but wow. So lastly, what do you do for fun? How have you been keeping yourself busy, like in terms of just like recreation? Was there any new TV shows or any new movies on demand that you discovered, or any new music you've been listening to, or anything like that?
What I do for recreation?
Yeah, for fun. Well,
Well,
while
here in
we're
Philadelphia, there are a lot. Well, at home, there are a lot of things to do. Once things open up a little more, I'm definitely going to enjoy a nice kayak ride on the Schuylkill River. I'm going to reacquaint myself with some of the more prominent cultural landmarks here in Philadelphia. Of course, I'm going to go to the beach in Atlantic City because I love to be in the water. I grew up on the water in Far Rockaway, so I definitely want to go and take a nice swim in the ocean. I want to reconnect with everybody that I have missed for so long. That's been one of the hardest parts of being in lockdown, is that I can't be around the people that I love and that I have such a wonderful time just relaxing and taking it all in with. So I think we're going to do that. I have a couple of things coming up with the charity for which I work, which is my brother's house, which houses and counsels all our military veterans that have been homeless, including LGBT veterans, which I'm very proud of. And you will be seeing that on Facebook. And ultimately, I really would like to go and see my family. They're all out west in Las Vegas. My sister is in the New York area. I want to reconnect with them and be thankful that I have the opportunity to do so, having gone through this lockdown, coronavirus, and all the things we've had to endure. And, just enjoy life as.
wow. So, anything else you want to tell the masses besides the most important message, which you're wearing on your hat? Obviously, vote. But anything else you want to tell the masses before we?
Yes. Well, yeah, I wore that hat on purpose. That's exactly right. I want
Yes.
everybody to go out and vote. Even if you have to get an absentee ballot from wherever you live, make sure you do that, and make sure that you cast your ballot in some way, because I cannot stress enough the importance of taking part in the 2020 election, even at the local level, presidential level, at all levels. This is going to be an election that determines the direction of real thought too. I also want to encourage everybody to become more open-minded, because we are so divided right now. We're so divided right now. We're at the point where people are rioting in the streets because things are happening that show just what deep disparity there is between the different groups of people in our society. And the way to undo that, the way to counteract that, is to become educated. So I think we need to go through a process of discovering the cultures of the people that are literally right next door to each other. When we know each other better, we tend, I think, to become more understanding and more tolerant. And that in turn leads to a reduction in the kind of deep divisions that we see amongst each other today.
Yeah. Wow. Very well said. And again, keeping yourself informed, education, getting other people's viewpoints and appreciating them, kind of looking outside your own scope. It's all very important. And we thank you for being a writer, for being a journalist, and really like putting yourself out there and telling people what's going on there. That's a great thing. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here today, on the show. So, and again, thank you for getting me up so early too. Again, I'm not
It was
normally.
my pleasure, Jed, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I thank everybody out there for watching us today too.
Yes, all of you out there, thank you for watching, and thank you, Nathan James, for being our guest today. And remember, vote, stay informed, do your part, whatever that may be, which includes finding like what you were meant to do to make a difference. So again, until next time, we are signing off. And happy Father's Day again.